Good afternoon. Welcome to the workshop. What we have on the agenda today is the concept of a retention policy. That needs a little bit of discussion, and we will try to proceed with that. For those who are unfamiliar, retention in this case it applies directly to information. So we produce a lot of documents, a lot of emails, and that is what we aim to tackle and discuss here today. The process is kind of like we have to have an overall retention policy. It comes from the board, and that policy then gets implemented in part or defined in part by each of the departments. And then ultimately, the mechanism by which those retentions are honored is going to be the responsibility of IT. And at some point, we will discuss the policy today, adopt the policy as a board, and then there's a resolution to adopt the policy. We will do that possibly as early as next Tuesday, possibly. And then there'll be a period of time where each of the departments has to come up with their definition of the data and retention that is required. On top of all of this are the RCWs, or the administrative codes that define what's expected of us. To that end, I would like to turn this over initially to Bailey Silva, our records or public records request person. There's been a recent change in title of sorts, so I'm going to hem and haw there a little bit. And
I prefer the term czar.
Czar is good. And I'm also sorry that I went to the eye doctor. I'm still a little blurry.
Oh.
So is that you, Bailey?
Bailey, just before you get started, I appreciate your patience with me. I go to a Rotary Club meeting on Wednesdays at noon. The discussion today was about Japanese internment camps in Eastern Oregon, which had no barbed wire and no guards. And it was just a fascinating, and it was a little bit longer than I expected. So sorry for being late.
It did not have alligators around the perimeter?
Not at all.
Oh.
They actually supplied critical farm labor for
Yeah,
the fields in Eastern Oregon.
there's a lot to be learned from that experience.
Yep, absolutely.
That's a euphemism for a lot of bad things happen. You're on, Bailey.
It's Public Records Officer for Cowlitz County. Is the job title.
I still like czar.
Okay, so what I'm going to touch on is our email communication, and just give a brief overview of why it's important that we put a retention policy in place to address our never-ending retention issues with our email. So email communication is an integral part of Cowlitz County's day-to-day operations. Right now, the county utilizes Barracuda to archive all of our emails, and that has been the case since 2010. There's no process right now for us to remove emails from the reviewer, thus creating many emails to exist. This graph gives an overview of the emails that have been added into the reviewer since 2010. And so the line is like the accumulation total, and then the bars moving up is each individual year. As you can see, we've steadily increased most of the time. As of 2022, there's 25,467,000. Just some statistics. Since 2010 to 2020, we have increased the number of emails we have received and sent by 303%. After looking at all the data and taking into consideration a couple of the decreases, the average increase per year has been about 12.6%. So this next slide gives an overview of like what our growth will potentially be in 2023 of emails. And we create a lot more records outside of emails. I just see emails as a one topic of one piece of the small piece of the big pie. So if we continue at the rate we are going in 2030, there would be 61 million emails in the Barracuda Archiver.
In this case, you might want to define what Barracuda is or means.
Yeah, Barracuda is the system that we use to store all of our emails. And I am able to pull emails out of Barracuda to respond to public records requests. So this next slide just gives us a statistic from State Archives. They estimate on average that about 40% of our emails are transitory and they have no retention value, which means that there is no reason for us to continue to keep those as long as they are no longer needed by the agency and they can be destroyed. So this next.
So by transitory, these are, let's set an appointment. Can you meet such and such a time? And multiple emails going back and forth, just setting up meetings, all have to be separately retained. And if we get one of those requests for all email communications on such and such a topic, or that so and so received between the dates, we have to pull even those that have no legitimate function in terms of information sharing.
Yeah, transitory typically means, we're not making an official decision in our capacity of, working for the county. We're just,
Or even,
hey, are you in
or even
today?
discussing issues.
Yeah, not even just, are you in today? Like, we all get Zoom team meeting invites, and if you accept those, it's creating an entirely new record in our system. And I feel like, we all accept meetings all the time, invites on our calendars. So those are good examples of transitory records. Yeah. And then people who are CC'd on emails are actually considered transitory because it's a carbon copy. The person with the actual record is the person who the email was sent to. So all those CCs that exist also are considered transitory. Okay. This graph is the same numbers from that first graph that shows all of our accumulation of emails. And then the gray bar graph shows what potentially does not need to exist in our reviewer account because it's 40% of that overall number each year. So it just kind of visualizes what doesn't need to be in there and be kept year after year.
So Bailey, there are two cost aspects to having this program. One is the sheer storage somewhere. It has to be kept in some record, the cost of storing that, which may not be all that expensive, but what's really expensive, staff time to go through and sift what has to be retained and what has to be shared. And we're looking at ways to make sure the public is served with the information about what's being discussed and reduce that cost by the non-information.
Yeah, so essentially, if I could follow on that, if you had a record request that 10,000 emails appeared, you just don't send those 10,000 emails out. You go through them to see if there are any things that are improper to send, right?
Yeah, I need to click on every single one, make sure that there's not any like personal information, anything that exists in the Public Records Act that's an exemption has to be reviewed and gone over. So it does require a lot of staff time clicking on each of those individual emails that, potentially didn't need to be there to begin with.
Now, another aspect of managing public records is discerning what bits of information need to be redacted. There are certain kinds of information that is not appropriate to be shared, addresses of victims in criminal situations, stuff like that. That's not going to be affected by the retention policy.
No,
those are still legitimate things that have to be reviewed. That's going to continue to be an expense. We understand that.
Yeah, those records, the goal with the retention policy is for us to keep those records for the up to the time we're required to keep them, and then have a process in place to get rid of them according to the schedule versus, a lot of things have a typical 7 years retention period, and sometimes, 10 years later, that document's still at someone's desk. And so the goal is to, get rid of that in just a timely manner. And then at that point, it won't be needed for the public records person to review the record and exempt it and redact it and provide it to somebody because, it doesn't exist any longer because it was legally able to be destroyed.
Implicit in your statement is going to be what our IT director will talk about as she goes through the policy, because it's not just emails, it's everything. And but anyhow, you continue.
There's not much left of this, but just this quote: transitory records can be deleted or recycled when no longer needed for agency business, but they're still subject to disclosure while they exist, which is kind of what we just went over. So
Yeah.
I just think it's an important note on how it impacts public records. What is the solution? I think this is like a large solution, and it's a group effort from just the entire county. But yeah, so this, you want to go to the next slide?
So I have a little bit of a hypothetical for you that relates to a discussion that we had yesterday on the adoption of the mental health tax and why it was sunsetted. Now, that happened in 2012. Is it possible that those records that might pertain to any kind of discussion about the sunsetting of that mental health tax when it was adopted way back in 2012, would that information disappear under this policy?
I'd have to look at the retention schedule, but a lot of records that are held in the commissioner's office are archival, which means we would never destroy them because you guys are making big legislative, policy decisions, and we don't destroy those types of records. So that, just off the top of my head, I'd have to look up the specific, there's DAN number for things and just specific records like that. But I would make the assumption that that would not be destroyed.
And again, I think that's important for us to reemphasize. We're not trying to bury secrets. We're trying to make it more practical and more affordable to provide that important service to the public whenever they have a question about how decisions were made. And that again is kind of the basis of the public records law.
Mhm. So yeah, what's the solution recommendation? It's a big overview of just kind of the goals that I see. And, I've had lots of conversations and we've had a lot of retention meetings for the past year or so. Just trying to get to a place where we can move forward. And so, yeah, at this point today, we're meeting because we need to establish a clear records retention and management policy moving forward. And then, alongside that is training countywide for employees on like what transitory records are and best practices for managing our email and just managing our every day-to-day records, whether you're in the auditor's office or you're in the assessor's office or just whatever department you are in, we all have different retention schedules, and it's important that we follow those, and training is important, I think, when it comes to that. Yeah.
So the thing that's not on your slide is you're actually slave to the legislature or the administrative codes that tell you about the particular retention policies they would like us to follow.
Yeah, it's about a 250-page document just for local government core. It's the Common Records Retention Schedule. Departments like the Superior Court Clerk's office, the Prosecuting Attorney's office, they would all follow completely different schedules. The BOCC's office would be in that large 250-page.
Yeah, one of the reasons to go through this is for the public really to understand it's a very simple concept that fans out into 1,000 problems and 1,000 definitions and costs and labor as well as equipment. This is an area where we don't want to make a mistake.
That's all I have for the slideshow, but if you guys have any other questions, I will hope to have the answers.
Let's go ahead and then switch over to Kim, who's going to tell us about the policy and I've got two policies, or do I? Yeah.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Kim Hort, IT Director. I also built a presentation if you're interested in getting a perspective on not only email, but what's on our file server. I believe Kelly has that as well. Does she? No, she didn't. Okay, I was like. So in regards to documents that we have on the file server, this is capturing more of the sensitive type of documents that we have on our file servers. There's different categories that we can kind of, breeze over in regards to topic, but CJIS is our Criminal Justice Information Services data, Social Security information, financial, and then PCI is like credit card information. There's also HIPAA data. And of those sensitive documents, we have over 66,000. And of those, there's almost, 27,000 that are stale documents, which means that they haven't been touched for about 10 to 15 years. So they're beyond the retention period and a liability sitting on our file network.
Are these data prior to the body cam?
This was ran maybe 2 months ago. So no.
Yeah, are we doing body cam just yet? I know I've seen some body cam data and it's
It's
been used.
just
in the
started,
court.
right? Just really recently.
Yeah, CCSO just implemented body cams, I believe, like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
So that doesn't, so these numbers
Okay.
don't reflect even that.
No, and this is our file server. So these are things that we're saving on the network.
These are kind of individual entities, which could be 10 bytes or
Mhm.
a lot
And
of
this can
bytes.
range from, records in the sheriff's office, records in drug court to records in IT
Mhm.
and budget. So, I mean, there's a good variety of data just sitting out. on our
Just off
network.
the top of your head, how much do we have stored away on the file servers in terms of space?
In terms of space,
Just off the top of your head, nothing too important.
I could tell you on the Laserfish side, the
Sure.
amount of space, that one is close to 16, no, sorry. Let me get my Laserfish rather than. We're close to 16 terabytes of just document data in Laserfish.
And on Barracuda, I thought we had something closer to 50 to 100.
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't have the specifics on how much room that takes up on the Barracuda side. I just have the amount of emails being held in there.
Sorry, I didn't understand you. Could you?
I don't have the information on how much like storage it's taking up, just the amount of emails that are being held in the system.
Yeah, I know from the fact that we've had to pay licenses for, I think up to 100 terabytes.
That is our backup agent, our Avamar is,
But we
100.
wouldn't back up if we didn't have it.
Correct. And so that's kind of one of the segues into, the next slide is identifying.
So before we go, I just have a couple of questions. This chart it raises these are Cowlitz County government documents,
Yes.
bits of information. What kind of loan information would we be maintaining?
Are you referring to like financial or credit card? information?
Financial, I get it with bank numbers because we mostly deposit
Yep.
salaries by bank draft, but insurance and loan autos for our employees, I don't understand that.
Is that what you're assuming, the financial? I think that's just what is deemed under financial. Primarily, I would assume it's more bank account numbers and not necessarily like what loans people have.
So Calais County isn't monitoring our employees' insurance
No,
or loan.
no, but
The other
that's,
thing is the next category, then personal credit information.
Mhm.
Calais County has maintaining personal credit information for all of our employees.
no, this is in regards to like credit card information. So like when we run transactions, charging somebody's credit card, running credit card numbers, that's that category of data.
Okay, and I understand about the healthcare information, HIPAA rules. I was just curious. I was thinking that was much more extensive than I would expect the government to have. So you
No.
cleared it up.
And I do apologize. Those are kind of like the categories in general of what's being scanned on our file servers.
Well, part of our responsibility is to make sure we don't overextend our powers. So
Correct. Absolutely.
This reminds me a little bit of when Sean Rowe shows us a picture of a D8. And it turns out it's just something he picked out of a catalog as opposed to our D8. I think that's what that is.
In regards to storage, I know that we are running out of storage. We currently have about 72.8 terabytes, which also includes the Laserfish side of things in our file servers. And in one of the slides that I'll present to you, about 68% of that is documents based off of our calculations and looking at the file servers. So
You know, the good thing, Dennis, is that no matter what, I don't think the government is going to print more dollars than we have space requirements. So we're ahead of them still.
fill it up as soon as possible.
Ugly thoughts.
did you have questions about the first slide, or are we ready to identify some?
We're good.
Some of the risks that we've identified is that we lack our visibility into criminal justice data, that we have to be under strict compliance in regards to, preserving criminal justice information properly. And that can interfere with our contracts with Department of Corrections and, FBI and whatnot. And then we also lack currently visibility into old and stale data. We worked with the vendor to temporarily install a module of a software we currently use to run those statistics and get you those numbers that I presented on the first slide. And then we don't have the ability to leverage AI to label documents. We would have to manually open each document and identify the contents of the document in order to properly tag it and then put it in its respective security folder. And then, as I mentioned, we're running out of space, so we have limited resources available to store documents digitally.
Do you have a question, Dennis? The top two, I'm not sure I understand. Could you go through the top two?
Sure. So without tools, we're not able to visibly see what file contains sensitive data.
When you say we, you're talking specifically not somebody from the public coming in, but IT.
IT and the departments to manage and retain and apply, document retention schedules.
But aren't the court systems exempt from the public disclosure laws?
Yeah, the court system does not fall under the PRA, but off the top of my head, I mean, the prosecuting attorney's office would be the one with, criminal justice information that would be subject to the Public Records Act.
And public defense and.
Yeah,
And
OPD,
law
the jail.
enforcement, and law enforcement and jail.
Yeah, sheriff's office is a big
Okay.
one. Yep.
So I'm still confused because I know we spent dollars buying software for the PA's office to communicate things over to the Office of Public Defense and vice versa.
This is in regards to our file server. These are the documents that we're housing in folders on our network.
Yeah, and what's the reason behind there? Because I was under the impression that IT had full control over all file servers in the county.
We do, but as to who puts what kind of data out there.
If you've got access to the file server, you can see anything and everything, right?
I would have to go through manually to look at every single document. There's not an automated process to look and identify what within what folder has CGIS data in it.
What would be, how is that different than any other file structure on another file server, a non-CGIS?
What do you mean by that?
The data on a file server is going to be organized in file folders.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'm trying to figure out what it is of the CGIS data you cannot see.
So we would have to open every single document to identify what type of CGIS data is in that document. It could be date of birth, it could be gender, it could be anything that's classifying that criminal or within that criminal record. And so what I meant by lacks visibility is that we don't have a tool in place that can scan and monitor and use AI to identify.
We don't have a tool that knows the structure of the document, so it can't find the right fields. We don't have an HTML definition of the contents. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the contents within the document itself, regardless of the format of the document, we can't just go because it's a PDF, that means it's not going to have CGIS data in it. Or if it's a Word document, or if it's HTML, it can still contain sensitive data.
Well, I'm still confused. Let's move on. Old stale data,
What was that?
item 2.
So again, we would have to manually go in to each file folder, each file, and identify when it was last edited or modified.
And how does that compare now to the non-stale data or the new data?
We would be able to tell when somebody accessed it and when it was last edited, which also pertains to retention.
And when you say old stale data, you're talking about something that's on an electronic medium?
This whole presentation of these slides strictly based off of folder documents out on our file network,
Okay.
digital records.
And what you're telling me is that a file created today has all the metadata that's appropriate for the file, and you can use that to find stuff. While the old data is just kind of,
No. Again, without having to manually go through each and every folder on the network to identify when it was last updated or changed. What I'm trying to articulate is that we don't have tools in place to automatically identify where the stale data is. It would take somebody's time to go through every department's folder and file network to identify that.
do you understand, Dennis? I don't.
The more recent files can be gotten into by more recent tools that you have, right?
That was just a sampling
Yeah.
of trying to identify the data.
But files that were developed, say, 10 years or longer ago can't be read by some of the tools that you
No,
can
it
use.
is red. What it's identifying is what is stale in old data past retention. So if it hasn't been touched in over, let's say 10 years, why do we still have it? What's the retention on that document? It's not necessarily the technology, it's when it was last accessed and, what are the contents of the document? Not the technology change between when it was created and today. This is about when it was last used, accessed, and what's within that document.
Could I jump in real quick with what I am thinking you might be saying, Kim?
Sure.
Sorry, this is David Berger from the prosecutor's office. I think what, at least in my mind, I'm having an analogy like to records that like the clerk's office would store. And I can get back to the question Commissioner Weber had about the records of the judges and PRA. But for example, I know that the clerk's office has a bunch of like really old cases, records dating back from years and years and years. And they're not like, if I want to go look up a court case today, I would just go up on Odyssey and I'd be able to search for it by case number and I'll be able to pull up the cases. But there are many really old cases that are not scanned into Odyssey. They're on like microfilm. And so it takes, the clerk's office had a contract with some vendor to go through and scan microfilm and scan this stuff all in. So I think what Kim might be saying is that we have really old records and we don't really have a good way to find those records because they're so old. And it would take someone specifically going in and manually locating those old records and trying to get them in a new format and saying, all right, is this something we need to keep for archival value? Is this something we can get rid of? Like, what is it? And because the records are so old and no one's done anything with them, we just don't have a way to deal with it. Is that kind of what you're saying? Or no?
No, sorry. I guess I'm not communicating well.
That's interesting. That made sense to me.
It sounds-
Yeah, I pictured it, go back far enough and we've got a lot of paper documents.
Mhm.
They get scanned in. And in some cases, you can do optical character recognition and that and stuff, and that's still flawed, but it's not like everything that was in digital form originally. So we've got non-digital stuff around that has been digitized in one form or another that may be searchable or not. We have a lady that wants to say something.
And I was going to add to, I don't know if this helps, but an example that I can think of. I don't know if this helps, but an example that I can think of, if I am understanding what Kim's trying to get across is, for example, someone in the board's office 30 years ago was creating paper records and those have been scanned in, say in 2010, and those haven't been touched since 2010. So we need this technology tool to identify those records so we can look at them and then dispose of them. But we don't have a way to identify what has not been touched. Is that more along the lines?
Yeah, and I can give an example. Back when Claire was, building, spreadsheets in the budget office back in, let's say, 2007, and that document has never since been touched. We don't have a tool in place to be able to look through all of our file folders with technology and identify that that document hadn't been accessed since 2007, saying that funny, 2007. So we don't have the ability to just query when files were last accessed.
So a retention schedule adopted would comply with the state law because we don't retain those records anymore. Maybe we don't have to worry about trying to figure it out because they're so old.
Right.
But-
Yeah, and
The retention schedule kind of establishes a time span where the records are alive and are accessible.
And it kind of falls into like the methodology of, what is it, the butcher?
The meat cleaver
The meat
method.
cleaver method. So, and I think Arn, you've mentioned that before too, where, if we know that this email is, 8 years old, we could put that into a category of like, why are we keeping this? It's kind of the same concept of that, but on the file server. We have these files that are out there that are older than a particular year. Why do we still have them? And then we can identify why.
Well, I'm willing to bet that you can't find me a file out there that does not have a last access tag on it that says it was last touched by user such and such on December 8th, 2003.
Correct.
Right, so that's where I'm lost. I think certainly the day you scanned the physical documents in, you may have had 20 documents that have now an origin date of December 5th, 2003. But you don't know that some of them in there are 25 years old and some of them in there are 3 years old. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Sometimes the odds of a record that's been sitting in our file servers for 20 years, it would still require manual review of staff to determine if it's met its retention, but just that tool would help move that process along.
Yeah. Okay.
Did we want to answer Commissioner Weber's question about the GR31 courts PRA, or did you want that answer, Commissioner?
Yeah, you can answer that better than I
I,
can.
I
David.
did understand what you said. It's still, I'm having trouble.
So I was making a reference to the court documents that are exempt. And the ones and the criminal justice data that is available for public, for responding to public records requests, but have to be reviewed for the sensitive data that doesn't have to be shared. That's
Criminal justice information is probably going to be held in the sheriff's office or the prosecutor's office. And then in terms of the courts, there's 3 sources of law for the records. There's the PRA, Public Records Act 4256 RCW, and then there's GR General Rule 31, and then GR 31.1. GR 31 is like Stacy's records, like the clerk's office court case records. So like what I was referring to earlier about Odyssey, like case number, 07- whatever, state of Washington versus whoever, that would be a GR 31 record, and you get it by going to the clerk's office and paying whatever the fee is to get those records. That's GR 31. GR 31.1 is the administrative records for the court. So if I wanted all the emails between Judge Basher and George Moya regarding juvenile, whatever, however they're running the court, and all the emails between them, that would be GR 31.1. And GR 31.1 is modeled after the Public Records Act. So you follow a similar process where you make a request to get those emails, but they're not subject to all the requirements of the PRA. So there's no like lawsuit against them for penalties and all those things because they're exempt from the PRA.
the public, but going through the process, the public can get access to those records.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And then back to the presentation, was there any further questions on those first 2 bullets, or did I clarify that well enough? Or I know I struggled apparently, but
Yeah.
Are we good?
Okay.
And then off of our analysis, we found that about 68% of the county storage requirements are for document files. And that the remaining 32% is for databases and operating systems.
And the adoption of the retention schedule, the retention plan would affect that how?
If we were to have a clear policy and guidelines, training similar to some of the solution items that Bailey went over, that number would decrease. There wouldn't necessarily be that much of a storage need for those documents if we were properly retaining them.
Okay.
Granted, there's the caveat, with imaging and drones and body cams that, that also impacts that number. So the more that we advance in technology, the resolution improves, and you can't necessarily compress that down to a smaller storage size. And then what is the solution? Again, kind of modeling off of Bailey's is to establish clear records retention and working on training and investing into technology.
What's the meaning of this slide?
Oh, sorry. When we did our disaster recovery business continuity, we asked the question in regards to retention. That was kind of part of some of those conversations. And most departments indicated that their files that are on the county network are essential for them to perform their respective services. So they need that for historical reference.
60 terabytes worth?
Mm.
Yeah, they weren't giving you a proper answer because there's a lot of garbage on there. Yeah, okay.
And then I kind of skipped ahead and already read this slide, but what is the solution? And again, starting with a clear records retention policy and training of our staff and investing into technology.
When you say investing in the technology, hmm, how do you envision that?
How do I
What-
envision that?
Yeah, what will the Veronas do for us?
In that example, the Varonis platform would have those modules that I addressed earlier where we can identify the type of data and the contents of the data. We can then identify the staleness of the data with those modules. So it's an investment into acquiring additional tools through Varonis.
That slide back on. So you're picturing a future where Varonis will properly classify information?
It would be a combination of using Microsoft products, as mentioned in like Bailey's presentation for like the email, additional modules within that software. You can identify and labels, and then Varonis uses those labels to then classify and move data as well.
Yeah, actually, for me, I don't care whether it's Varonis and Microsoft or any of those, just so you're envisioning that I generate an email and some process that IT host is going to say, look at that and say, that has a retaining period of 3 months.
Or individuals would have tools to classify the document when it's created. That's another.
I could just override that. So I could have a default that says, well, my email is 3 months, except the ones that I say are 3 years or something like that.
I can't say confidently like how I could restrict people overriding and moving data around. I would have to look into that further.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the automatic aspect of this, and that's a good thing and a bad thing because it will make assumptions, and the thing we want to avoid is assuming something is proper that turns out to be improper, and there's consequent harm as a result of that. And so I'm not sure. I've talked to you before about a 5-year plan kind of thing where we know what our endpoint should be, what our goals are. And I'm trying to figure out if that's included in this statement. And then there are a lot of details. I think for the moment, why don't we go ahead and review the policy that, and this is a good thing for the public to see. There's just a lot of detail, a lot of discussion, a lot of pitfalls that can happen.
So earlier this year, the board asked me to look into a retention policy, and I worked with legal, and they provided me with a sample from Kickatas County. And then while working through that, there were additional items like defining a committee and adding into the policy exiting employees and records maintenance and storage. So it has been a discussion kind of between IT, Commissioner's Office, and legal.
So I had mentioned in the introduction that this is really the umbrella policy for the entire county.
Mhm.
And then each department has to have their own subordinate policy.
That, or they would follow this policy and the guidelines from state archives and that retention schedule.
Right.
So I have two different policies. They look the same on the front page, but they're different.
I think they're the same, Dennis. The one has the edits and one has no edits in it.
They both seem to have edits. That's the confusing. The second page.
Yeah,
When-
it's,
One has edits from Commissioner Mortensen and the other one has edits from the Civil Prosecuting Attorney's Office.
And how would I know the difference?
you take the one with the fewest edits,
Confused.
because that's the one that the PA's office, David submitted to us saying, I can live with this subject to maybe a couple of hot spots. Is that true, David? David, you're muted. It's already hard enough for me to hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, I liked most of your edits. I think I changed a couple of things. I added in definition of transitory record instead of temporary. So if you see that draft with on the first substantive page, if you see a definition of transitory record, that would be the one that I worked on. So
Yeah, I agree with your changes here. I had changed a shall to a may, and you said, no, it really should be shall. And then with your explanation, I agree with you. The weasel word we can use, pardon the expression, is if the administrative codes call for a 5-year retention on something, we can, and now we're in a policy put in 8 years, but at 8 years, we eliminate the data as per the policy.
are you saying like that if the state archives with the retention WAC says you have to retain something for 5 years, that's like the minimum time that you retain it, we say we're going to retain it for 8 years and then we'll get rid of it?
Yeah, and the
It's
reason
plus.
there is I was apprised of the latencies involved with trying to get contract completions and things through the board, and I don't want things to fall through the cracks. Now, it may be that in the future you say, we now have the linkages such that we don't have to have the 5 to 8 year buffer period, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I want to play it in a safe way.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, that there could be a business need that we need to retain something longer than the minimum retention schedule.
Right.
I agree that there should be that flexibility where the county has the ability to retain a record if we think we need to. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that would.
But
go-
other than transitory records, which don't need to be saved at all, even records past the retention date are going to be archived.
There's 3 different options. There's archival, or there's destruction or appraisal. So archival would go to the state archives, and appraisal would also go to the state archives, and they would select what they would retain and then, yeah, destroy. Not everything is archival. Most records are not archival.
One of the things that's coming up is our work on the Spirit Lake Collaborative and all those policies that were developed back in the 1980s may have to be reviewed. We hopefully, I mean, those records are going to be archived. They're going to be available somewhere,
I
which is different from responding to public disclosure requests, which ought to be much more contemporary.
Well, maybe, but I'm fond of history, and I know you're fond of history because that's how we learn. There are things that come out of the BOCC, like an ordinance that was passed in 1919 should still be available for someone to find that ordinance. I don't see those ever going away. So I forget where I was going, but anyhow, I got there. So does anybody have any issues with the document on the first page, let's say?
First page is just basic definitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And Kim, you said you used someone else's as a
Yes.
template?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I've looked through it and I'm sure there are things we might wish to change in the future, but at the moment, I don't know of any. Well, until we get to the last page.
I do want to make note that in between the conversations I've had with Commissioner Mortensen and legal, we did find that there actually is a 2002 retention policy in place. So that would require a resolution to that. And then
I'm
digging.
sorry, there is one in this county
Yes,
from 2002.
yes.
So we'd have to throw that one out and
Yes.
put this one in.
Yes.
Okay.
One thing that made me laugh though, reading it was, the importance of office space was very, very important. So scanning documents was a good way to go because then you would get more office space. So just a sign of the times that 22 years later, now we're discussing all those digital documents that we scanned in. So another thing is we do have a 1984 policy in place as well for establishing a records committee. So this new policy also encompasses that policy
That committee is you and Bailey
and a few other
and a
friends.
few others.
So when this comes before us, we're going to have to have a motion to replace those or. Okay. And Bailey and or you will apprise us of which ones that. So that. Or someone's going to take notes here, which ones we have to undo. Okay, good. And then the issue I had on the last page is the information technology records analyst. It's a little bit of a confusion there. I'm trying to separate out the IT, which is kind of the tool from the actual policy agent. So the board itself is the policy agent, at the high level, and then the individual departments like the other courts will tell us about their data and what their retention should be and that kind of thing. And then IT has to submit how they're going to handle that, how they're going to implement that. So as I look at this, I don't know who the IT records analyst is. We recently added another individual to our office to handle the PRRs, and somewhere in there, well, I'll just go through here. The IT records analyst is responsible for providing guidance to county departments and public record retention schedules. I don't think that is true. That has to come from the public records officer. And overseeing electronic information systems is an IT, depending on how IT obligation, depending on how you define that. And certainly the collaboration is good, but I think it's a distinction I want to see made, that the guidance doesn't come from IT as to the retention schedules themselves. And I don't know, what does the second paragraph mean in that case? The IT records analyst in consultation with relevant stakeholders will develop and maintain a comprehensive department and so forth.
So essentially what I was trying to do is provide a resource to the departments to where a records analyst could identify, hey, you have these stale documents or these documents have CGIS data. Are you needing those? What's the retention schedule? And working with the departments to identify and kind of being the hall monitor, but in a digital form.
So you're pitching someone on your staff could get a call from the commissioner's office and say, can you find me some particular document of some strange flavor? And that's what you'd expect there?
No, more of assisting the departments in following the retention schedule that they are set to follow. So working with the departments to identify documents that are over a certain age, for example, or documents that contain particular data or fall into a particular label classification. That person could, I guess, yes, identify those for the department.
Why wouldn't that be in the public records request or the public records officer obligation?
Why would it not be, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it sits, is sort of what I'm thinking, as opposed to IT.
As in IT provides the tools to get the job done.
Provides the tools, but the
But the person who's
discrimination,
responsible for getting the job done is gonna be the public records officer.
that's
But they've
exactly
got
what I'm saying.
all the tools at their disposal
Yeah,
from the department, rather than making it because then you have two heads, two people in charge. You got that research analyst from the IT who answers to you, and the public records officer who's got the overall responsibility to make sure
Okay.
the law is followed.
And I just want to add too, I see a lot of crossover between the two, but responding to public records request is different than handling everyday retention for all county employees. So it's, I think that there's benefit to having, I've taken on the role of retention within the county, and Kim and I have worked really closely together to do that. And I think, moving forward, my hand would be in the pot per se, because it directly impacts public records requests. But I do see there's a difference between me fulfilling public records requests and an individual managing the overuse of our county servers and the technology behind what we do, I guess, is kind of outside of the scope of what I currently do in terms of, being able to identify. But I do understand, Commissioner Mortensen made the comment that we need the tools, and I think the tools will help alleviate that. But I do think that they cross paths, but they're separate paths at the same time, for lack of a better way to put that.
yeah, they always, perfect interfaces don't exist. And there's always cross collaboration and all that. But I think what my colleague mentioned is essentially it. If we're talking about you've got to get someone responsible for, I would guess, reviewing all the old stuff. That's going to be quite a chore. And I think it has to be in the public records officer purview. Has nothing to do with IT. It's just saying these records are old. How do you know they're old? Because IT told you that they're old, but IT doesn't decide if they're old enough to be purged or not purged. It is the public records officer that does.
One thing to keep in mind, though, is the distinction between what we were talking about earlier with public records and the Public Records Act and court records and what's housed on the county servers. So the statute that talks about the public records officer being that each state and local agency shall appoint a public records officer. So Bailey's position is a state mandated position under 4256-580. But the IT has its own separate chapter. I think it's like the Central Services chapter or whatever, that all the the data or whatever stored within the county is under the purview of IT. So that would include like the judges, I believe. So the judges and their data is, they work with IT, I believe. That I think they have Judge Basher serving as doing some of their stuff, and there might be some sort of segregation. But there's like a distinction between public records and and basically what they're saying, and the judges are and the courts are separate under GR 31, GR 31.1, how the records are maintained and how they're given out. I'm not really explaining it well, but do you kind of see where I'm coming from?
I think we're in agreement, actually. You're saying it's not just the public records officer we have for the county, but it's got to work in collaboration with the other pertinent ones. Yeah, absolutely true. But the final, we still want to, the way I would picture that, and maybe I'm a bit naive, is that the courts would be possibly asked by the records officer, you know, you've got stuff here that is 85 years old. Do you need it? Chances are they do, but let's say let's say going ahead now, we're going to have a lot of body cam stuff occupying a lot of space. Eventually, some of that should be purged and or compressed. And there's several algorithms you could use that say, if it's been used in a trial, you have to keep it at a high compression, at a high fidelity. And if it's never been used, you can compress it down and so forth. All those things have to come from the judges or from the courts. But they're expressed in concert with the public records officer.
I guess my thinking was that, like, for the data held by the court, they would need to go through IT for help. And so like if they have an issue with data storage, their point of contact would be the IT, and whoever the public records officer would be would need to work with IT to get it done. You see what I'm saying? Like, because it's the
Oh,
data.
yeah, no, absolutely. But the distinction I'm trying to make is that IT has no way of knowing and telling the courts anything other than you ask me to store 100 terabytes of data and I can't do that. But other than that, the courts have to decide what the data is and the retention is.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that paragraph 4 or section 4 should be rewritten a little bit to reflect that.
I did have, it might be just a grammar error, but I'm not sure. In that item 4, the second paragraph of responsibilities, it talks about maintaining a comprehensive department records retention schedule.
Whereas
Is that all departments or is it the IT department?
No, it's all departments. So the courts would have theirs, the PA would have
So it
theirs.
should be a comprehensive court retention schedule for all departments. Because it doesn't say that. It makes it sound like it's the IT departments or it's a single department. So I was confused.
Right, and it also depends, yeah. My interpretation is that IT can't tell the board what documents. IT can't tell the courts what documents. So we have our own retention schedule, which I call it's a policy subordinate to the overall policy.
Okay.
So David, is that something you'd want us to look at to change and then pass it through you?
yeah, I mean, you could give me an idea of what you have ideas on how you would restructure the language. I'd be happy to take a look at it.
That sound all right to you? Okay. And do I have the latest copy? I know you emailed me one. Is that the same one if I just accept the changes? David, maybe you'll send me your copy.
Sure, yeah, I can send you the last that I have.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Now, an interesting thing and under section 4 also is auditing. How do you envision that being done? Let me ask David at this point.
Mhm. What paragraph in section 4? Oh, the
Yeah,
audit.
when it says auditing, the point being is you can't ask the same entity that creates the document to audit or the stuff. So are we required to have an external auditor of some kind?
I'm not sure about legally required for that, for the records. I think when I read that language in my mind, kind of the big picture idea I had in my mind was that the county, or what I think Kim was trying to do is that all the county departments, this hasn't been their focus on cleaning up old records. And so this is why we're having this sort of exponential accumulation of records over time, those charts that we saw of the emails building up in the old files. And so if we have someone, I think what she calls the IT records analyst position, to be periodically reviewing data or whatever they have. I'm not a technology guy, so I can't articulate it well, but if they're reviewing the data that they can see within each county department, they can say, oh, look, the treasurer's office has like, they've gotten all these emails and percentage wise, they really haven't deleted any. And we can see that we can see the content of the emails, and it looks like a lot of these, 20% of these emails are like, there's cake in the break room, come get it. They don't need those. And there's a bunch of files they haven't touched in years. And so they really need to get in there and start cleaning it up. And then that IT person would work with the treasurer's office in cleaning up, I guess. So I guess the audit in my mind was maybe they would have a set time of conducting a review of each department and to see how they're doing. And I'd have to defer to Kim on if I'm being correct in my interpretation.
Yeah, we might need to talk about this a little bit. I'm picturing that we have needs for auditing in at least two levels. One of auditing is we have a policy, and that should be audited to make sure it's in compliance with the administrative codes.
Sure.
And then IT's execution, we would want to have an audit that says, okay, according to the policy, this data should be over here. And IT says, yep, it's over there. And that's kind of an audit that I think we sort of do, but if we do it in an official way, it may be useful. I don't know. I'm not that much of a bureaucrat to know.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not sure that there's ever like a Secretary of State audit. I think it would just be that if we ever deleted data or records in violation of the retention schedules, we could be subject to potentially criminal penalties.
Yeah. So let's avoid that.
Yeah, good plan. But I see what you're saying on the two levels of the audit. That makes sense.
Maybe I'll chat a little bit with our auditor and find out whether she has a recommendation. It almost sounds to me like it's got to be someone from outside.
You're saying like an independent person from IT to make sure that the IT records analyst is complying with the policy?
Yeah, and I'm sure the SOS would be glad for a fee to provide.
Yeah, maybe try to keep it in-house with the local.
Or we
audit.
just make that provision part of the auditor, our own auditor's responsibility. They do that for purchasing and for all vouchers.
Yeah, and
They-
yeah,
They're used to performing that.
In fact, the auditor
100%.
has talked about having in-house audits. It may play into it, so.
I don't know if it's helpful to add, and I guess the overall intent of this is similar to like what we have with purchasing. We have a buyer that is a subject matter expert on contract language. We have attorneys that are experts on law. My intent of this position would be somebody that has expertise in the state's retention and our policy that could guide the
Yeah.
department. So that's my overall goal. So if it's misleading in any way, that was not my intent.
But Kim, yeah, somebody needs to be providing the advice. Who's auditing the advice getter? That shouldn't be that same person.
And what I meant by auditing was auditing.
Making sure the departments do their job.
Yes. And that they are aware of the data that they're storing. So essentially looking at what we're housing within our infrastructure.
Yeah, de facto, that would probably be the public records officer as an office, or public records office, which they're already setting themselves up to do because every mail going out to a response to a PRR has to go through the office. Am I not right on that, Bailey?
Can you repeat what you said?
I beg your pardon?
Can you repeat what you said? It kind of,
I'm saying, prior to the very, very recent change, a public records request would be responded to from any number of places without going through one central place. And it's now going through one central place. So you have uniformity of response. And in some sense, you're auditing that we're honoring the 5-day stuff.
yes.
You, even with my glasses, I can tell you're like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, I mean, every day I'm making sure that, we are sending our 5-day letters, we are responding the way that we should. So that's a continuous. effort on our
Regardless
part.
of what department it comes from, right?
Oh, yeah, regardless of
Yeah.
where that request was sent to within the county. And just to also add to this analyst, records analyst position being housed in IT, I see a lot of back work needing to occur. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to occur to get us to a point where we don't have like the 50 years of records being housed.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's been rattling in my head also because we really are working on a policy that has to span the antique and then look into the future. And I'm not sure that we shouldn't split those up, or there shouldn't be a separate paragraph that says, we'll do the best we can with the old data.
Yeah, and I think I kind of mentioned in my recommendation, that we need, moving forward, we need to, make these changes and actively be better about the way we manage records. But we also at the same time, we need to be addressing the historical documents that do not require being archived and preserved.
Yeah, David, should the comment like that appear in the policy?
What's the specific comment?
It would be something like data prior to or data of a non-electronic source may have to be dealt with in a slightly different manner. The intent is always to be responsive to public requests and proper retention. But I don't know, something that acknowledges that we have tons of information which isn't properly indexed or isn't even indexed at all. So when you want to search for something, you might be here till Christmas.
Yeah, so you're saying adding language in the policy that
I'm
highlights.
asking, what do you think? Because I don't want us to be in violation of our policy just because the data is not tractable to our policy.
Mhm.
Well, we achieved the first objective by making sure all the departments set up the deadlines, come up with the dates, right? That are consistent with the state law and so we know that anything past a certain date in is not retained. It's not available for public comment anymore. And that doesn't include the transitory stuff that gets eliminated, right? It's almost instantaneously. But the acknowledgement should be that documents of a nature beyond the retention date, before the retention date, is subject to a longer search through state archives if it's available.
Yeah,
Or did I not understand what you were driving at?
no, I think it's right. I'll think about putting some words in it. I'll work with David on that and see if it holds together. It's a pretty tough concept. This policy applies except.
Except when it doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
I'm afraid too much of government does that anyway, but
So you're talking about specifically addressing like super old hard copy documents and how we resolve those. It's possible that could be covered by, without saying it specifically, could be covered by, it's on page 5 of the document. You go to records, maintenance and storage above exiting employee.
Oh, above exiting employees.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah, okay.
says departments shall prescribe an appropriate records maintenance program. So that complete records are filed or otherwise identified and preserved. Records can be found when needed. The identification and retention of permanent, essential, and or archival records are facilitated, and permanent and temporary records are physically segregated, or for electronic records, segregable. So maybe that, and then each department shall, and then the number 3, organize records for easy recall. Could be that what you're talking about is sort of encapsulated within that if you've got a bunch of hard copy documents laying them around, you need to organize them for easy recall, and that might mean translating them to a different format. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That would do it. I'm a little wondering whether that's.
If we need to say it, if we need to spell it out more specifically, there might be a way we can do that. So yeah, we can work on it.
Okay, so that'll shift over to you. I was going to write something, but I think you might be.
You can take,
We're talking the same thing.
yeah, you can take a first crack at it if you want. That's fine. Either way, it's fine.
Yeah, or why don't you go ahead and I'll be thinking on it, because I'm still a little bit confused as to how to go about, like, there are words here like organize records for easy recall. That is a very soft requirement because we don't know what an easy recall is. So it may be easy recall based on age means that it's still hard.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So maybe we leave it alone, and you're right, maybe that just subsumes it.
That might be a simpler method, and then we can articulate to the departments that this is what that section means, that you should be cleaning up these old paper documents.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to come from each department, right, as they define their data.
Yes.
Yeah. Do they realize that? They don't?
I can't speak on behalf of other departments, so, but I don't.
But
think
you have
people-
a suspicion.
I have a suspicion that people don't realize how much data they have digitally. I've
And how
talked-
much obligation they have to set their own policy for that, that's
Correct.
compliant.
Correct. I've talked with somebody specifically about retention, and Bailey was in on the conversation. And he was diligent about the paper retention schedules and following that. But once it goes into the digital abyss, it's just kind of that.
They use the quote out of sight, out of mind.
Or
find
depending on
that
one's
strange.
personal filing system, it could be in plain sight and you still wouldn't know where it is.
We've had plenty
Yeah,
of
that's true.
experience with. I better not say anymore.
I had reached out to all the departments probably 6 months to a year ago, just, you know, asking them, you know, what do you guys do for following retention? And the general response was, we follow the local retention schedule or, you know, Superior Court's records retention schedule. So I think everybody, you know, is aware that
Run that by again. You're saying you've contacted them and they said in 2 sentences, this is it and I'm done?
most of my responses were providing me the retention schedule from the state. So
Oh, from
just,
the state.
yeah, from the one from the state. So everybody's, you know, acknowledges that we all are aware that that's the retention schedule that we all should be following.
What our retention schedule is, we can just say everything. Isn't, I mean,
Currently.
that's the whole reason we're trying to go through the policy. Say, no,
Well-
no, no, you got to be a little bit more specific then.
I think they said that we abide by the state, but the problem is my data and your data may, I've got to say, my data translates into this administrative code.
And
And they're not willing to do that, I think. And that should not be a job for you or for IT because
well, yeah, I think what's difficult is, you know, we all wear different hats every day and it's sometimes like, you know, every county employee almost needs to put on like their 15-minute retention hat and like address the retention at their computer, at their desk. But it's difficult when, you know, we're all doing a million other things every day. So that's kind of what adds to the, you know, issue of why we're here today.
I remember some meeting, and I think it was at a WASAC conference where somebody said, the way we handle that is last half hour on the last day of the work is when everybody goes through and does the retention review.
I did take a training, I think it was a WAPRO training, which is Washington Association of Public Records Officers, and they offered a lot of interesting, agencies try a lot of different things on how to address. I think some agencies are closed to the public, like one day every 6 months, just to allow their employees to go through the folders in their office and do those things that we don't have the access or the capability to do when, you know, someone's standing in front of us and we want to help them.
yeah, the message there is however we do it, it's not free.
Dana Giggler, when she was a county employee, told how when she was at the Attorney General's office, there was like one day every, I don't know, few months where every attorney in the office would have to spend that entire day going through email and deleting non-essential email or saving in a special folder ones that they needed to retain for the future. And that was everybody's assignment for the day. You didn't do legal work. That's what you did. So that's the kind of structure that probably is needed.
Yeah, and I think at some point in the future with, here's where IT would step in with AI and maybe can produce things that shorten that job, but essentially, ultimately, it'll be something that requires hand touching.
Something else to add too, the way that I interpret retention as a benefit to, you know, the citizens of Cowlitz County is if I get a public records request and I have, you know, 10,000 records to sift through, that's going to take me, you know, I have to do installments and it's going to take me a substantial amount of time depending on how many other requests are currently open within the county and just taking, you know, all these factors into consideration. But if we are addressing retention appropriately, I may only have 4,000 records that I have to sift through at that point, and then this individual gets their records in a, you know, in a shorter amount of time, just because there's less for me to go through and, you know, that citizen gets their records in a faster manner.
There's another thing we haven't mentioned. If you go from 10,000 to 4,000, your probability of an oversight has been greatly reduced.
That is also true.
And the citizens getting what they're actually wanting instead of a bunch of emails about cake in the break room and stuff.
Donuts, yeah.
Yeah.
Benefits fair. wellness activities.
Yeah, one that I think about all the time is the accepting the meetings. We all accept meetings every day, and I've clicked on probably hundreds of accepted. All it says is Arn Mortensen accepted this meeting invite.
As long as we're digressing just a little bit, not too much, in keeping with this, I had talked with Kim some, and it's probably poses IT some complications, but I figure we really ought to decide what it is we would like done, and then IT comes back and says, I can't support that, and so you have to then workshop that. But if IT, you at least have a goal and you realize, in this case, any mail that comes out of Judge Basher is going to be different than any mail that comes out of the mailroom clerk that we have. So the mailroom clerk would be in a bin that is 90-day retention. Judge Basher is, by exception, he'd have to say, this is no, you'd have, and we could put that burden on people. There are so many positions in the county that are not sensitive to the categories that Kim had up there, like HIPAA and all that kind of stuff. We could almost overnight, if we could get the software to help us with that, cut down tremendously on any new growth of emails that have no significance. I forget, transitory emails.
Yeah, I think cutting off the growth and addressing the back is very important.
Have you looked in to see if there's anything like that? You can categorize it that way?
Emails?
Well, I'm talking to IT in this
Oh.
case, because I figure you can say, Mortensen, your server is here. And so your server is there, and you can work policies on servers.
In theory, yes, we could do something along those lines. There's going to be the exceptions to that because
Always, yeah.
always.
Yeah.
And then whether or not that follows the
So
state archives retention schedule.
particularly Commissioner Mortensen's emails have to be preserved forever because it's so important.
No, but all kidding aside, you can see the value
Oh, yeah.
and my guess is half the employees, it's going to be transitory.
Once,
Just automatic.
once they get the proper training to identify what's really transitory. Because
Proper training is very important too for all county employees. Yeah, on what is transitory, because
Oh, that's the other thing. Who's doing the training?
well, I think one of it says the IT records analyst does the training.
It would be a collaboration with that position plus the public records officer.
Yeah, I think, yeah, all of that stuff. We are getting a pretty good cooperative stuff, so yeah, I think that would be cool. Consequences for non-compliance.
They're given free guys email.
Oh. So I had talked to Kelly about putting something on the schedule for next Tuesday. I think that's too soon then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Rick doesn't get off that easily.
so Commissioner, do you, I had thought that we would get an agreement through email on through the clerk and the PA on on some of the minor changes we've talked about. And then the actual adoption of that requires the resolutions and undoing the resolutions.
Right.
Do that all at one time. The earliest would be a week from this coming Tuesday. Is there a time sensitivity on that particular adoption?
I don't know of any.
I don't know of any either.
Is this something that we should vet through the other?
August
elect-
31st should have been done.
Do what, bet through email, you said?
No, I was gonna say, acknowledging other elected officials, would that be of any benefit? Since this policy technically impacts.
Yeah, that's always a nice, polite thing to do. And that would give us another week, so we're Thanksgiving weekend's a good one.
Were you gonna reach out to Auditor Fundingsland, Commissioner Mortensen?
Would you repeat, please?
You had mentioned maybe reaching out to Carolyn about the auditing. So I don't know. She
I'll
might,
do that soon.
yeah, I just didn't know, she might be busy with election stuff. So I don't know.
Was that, it wasn't a might be, right? It was, is busy, right?
It's busy, yeah.
Well,
Busy season.
well, why don't we aim to get it wrapped up by the end of November?
I like
Gives
that.
us a month to get all the little details, the adjustments that we've made.
Okay,
And consultation, a draft going out in a couple of weeks. We can have a meeting with electeds on their comments and
we should get this draft out by next week, because yeah, David's very familiar with it now.
of course, the next couple of weeks are pretty important on legislation. We have to set the levy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's coming up, so we can't do it. I don't think we can do it. There's no way we can do it by the end of this month, so which is next week. So
Agreed.
I'll map it out during that time.
Are you
Right.
out the week of the 14th, November 14th for that WASAC?
Well, we wanted to consult with our electeds, right?
Right.
Okay, so whatever the draft is, then it needs to go out to the electeds in time for them to look through it, so we can have a meeting. And so again, I'm looking at that last week, the week after we come back from Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. After we've had a chance to vet it.
That would be November 28th.
Okay.
So, yeah, we have another Tuesday.
That would be what?
November 28th.
And worst case scenario, that just still gives us a month. I mean, ultimately, my preference is let's start next year with a retention policy. So we can do that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
Well,
I'm
thank you.
sending Commissioner Mortensen, my latest draft, is that right? I'm sending you my latest, the latest draft that I had, Commissioner Mortensen.
Something about the latest draft you had?
He's going to send you his latest
Right.
draft. Yeah,
Right. Thank you.
Yep, I'll do that this afternoon.
perfect.
Okay. That sounds good. According to my schedule here. Well, I should say, do we have any more comments or things you want to bring up? I mean, I find these things hard because you're just trying to catch.
Molly, you've been very quiet. Anything you want to ask us or weigh in on?
Oh, she is there.
Yes or not? Oh, there she
There
is.
she is.
No, I was just enjoying the discussion and making sure that Mr. Berger was giving the GR 31 and 31.1 news, and he did that perfectly. So
Good.
nothing else to
Alright.
say.
He was trying to, I almost interrupted him when he gave some number 0.70. I said, no, are you sure it's not 0.71?
Thank you.
Good. All right.
All right, so I see no hands. This is an opportunity for somebody to raise a hand for any comments. I tend
Any
to
other
try,
comments on any other topics too, right?
well, I tend to try and read, I was gonna say, I tend to try to, I'm thinking, this is subject to agreement with the colleagues, really it's not that important, that Tuesday should be what I would call open lines Tuesday. On these work sessions, I like them to be focused on the work stuff, but that's not an inviolate rule. It's just a preference on my part. And miscellaneous, we need to talk about an upcoming trip.
Let's see. I have the leadership conference, and I think Rick is going to that as well.
Who is going?
Rick. is
Right,
planning
right.
to
We
go for
agreed
both
on
of
that.
us. It's the one
already,
in
didn't we?
Spokane.
Yeah.
You want to join us?
No. Thank you.
Okay. So there's probably some kind of notice that needs to be given that we're going to be both attending the same conference.
Yeah, we've been working on that.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty common at that conference that, multiple commissioners from commissions show up from multiple counties.
And no executive sessions, right? If there's nothing else, I'll just close the meeting. Going once, going twice, we're adjourned.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.